The dark decline of Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson's abandoned paradise. It's winter. The wind cuts through the California valleys with a dry, almost surgical chill. High in the hills of Los Olivos, among gnarled oaks and golden fields stretching as far as the eye can see, stands a gate, an immense gate made of wrought iron, with details that mimic Victorian lace. It's closed. Behind it, a private road winds for miles. Silent, empty. In the distance, through the afternoon mist, it's possible to make out the silhouette of a mansion. No, more than a mansion. An entire complex. Towers, domes, windows that reflect the grey sky like lifeless eyes. This place used to be called Neverland. It has already resonated with the voices of thousands of children. It has already shone under the lights of amusement parks. It has already hosted elephants, giraffes, chimpanzees dressed in human clothes. It has already been the setting for pharaonic parties, for dreams fulfilled, for promises whispered in the ear of an entire generation. But now, the silence is absolute. The roller coasters are frozen in time. The carousels no longer turn. The animals have left, and the mansion, that cathedral of excess, of childhood desire transformed into architecture, remains empty, like a mausoleum built for a god who never returned. There is something deeply unsettling about a place made for joy, that now exudes abandonment. Why? Why would a man who had everything, fame, money, limitless creative power, build a paradise and then let it rot? Why does a refuge turn into a prison? And what happens when a person's dream becomes too heavy, even for them? Neverland isn't just the story of Michael Jackson. It's the story of anyone who has ever tried to build a world in their own image. It's about the invisible price of trying to control reality. It's about the emotional, financial, and spiritual cost of turning fantasy into reality. Because every great creation demands something in return, and sometimes what she charges is much more than we imagined. Before we begin this journey, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had a dream so big it seemed impossible? A place you imagined building, a life you envisioned living, a version of yourself you wanted to become? What if that dream became reality, but at the cost of everything else? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to know what you dream about, and if you also feel sometimes that dreams choose us as much as we choose them. And if you want to understand how the most beautiful places in the world hide the darkest stories, subscribe to the channel, because this is just the first mansion, and there are so many others waiting to be investigated. Now, let's go back, to return to the moment when all this began. The moment Michael Jackson looked at an empty property in the heart of California and saw more than just land, but the possibility of never growing again. Michael Jackson is 29 years old. He is, at this moment, the most famous human being on planet Earth. Thriller. He has sold over 65 million copies. His face is on every continent. His voice resonates in languages he doesn't even understand. He can buy anything, go anywhere, have access to anyone, and yet he can't sleep. He can't walk down the street. He can't enter a restaurant without being surrounded. He can't feel the wind on his face without someone recognizing him, shouting his name, asking for an autograph, trying to touch him as if he were a sacred relic. Michael Jackson is a prisoner of his own glory, and it is precisely in this state, exhausted, isolated, suffocated by fame, that he finds the place. The property is located 2 hours north of Los Angeles, hidden in the Santa Ynez Mountains. It comprises 1,500 hectares of rolling land, covered in centuries-old oak trees. There is a secret valley. Streams cut through the landscape like veins of silver. The air is clean, the sky endless, and the silence is real. For a man who spent his entire childhood in the spotlight, being watched, judged, molded like a product, this place is more than just property. It's a promise of freedom. Michael buys the ranch for $19.5 million, an absurd price for the time, But he's not just buying land. He's buying the possibility of rebuilding his childhood, of creating a world where the rules of the outside world don't apply, where he can finally be who he was never allowed to be, a child. And then construction begins, not of a house, of a universe. First, there's the main mansion, 12,000 square meters of Tudor Revival architecture with touches of European castle and American colonial mansion, white columns, balconies that extend like open arms, pointed roofs that pierce the sky. Inside there are themed rooms, movie theaters, a library with rare first editions, staircases that seem straight out of fairy tales. But this is just the beginning. Michael doesn't want a mansion. He wants an amusement park, a zoo, a sanctuary, a spiritual retreat, a living museum of his own imagination. Then he builds a carousel, not just any carousel, an antique restored carousel with hand-painted wooden horses that spins to the sound of children's music amplified by speakers hidden in the trees. A Ferris wheel, 24 meters high, illuminated by thousands of lights that shine like artificial stars when night falls. Roller coasters, trails that wind through the oak trees, climbing and descending hills, providing a controlled, safe, and predictable adrenaline rush. A train, a miniature locomotive with real carriages, travels throughout the property, passing over wooden bridges, tunnels dug into the earth, and stations decorated like small towns of the Old West. A private zoo, giraffes, elephants, orangutans, llamas, flamingos, albino snakes, and Bubbles, the chimpanzee who would become almost as famous as Michael himself. Bubbles, who wore human clothes, sat at the dinner table and slept in rooms decorated like a child's. A movie theater, with red velvet armchairs, professional projection screen, fresh popcorn prepared at any time of day or night. Michael watches classic films, cartoons, musicals from Hollywood's golden age, alone, or accompanied by invited children who sit beside him, eating sweets, laughing, living the fantasy of a world without adults. Themed gardens, marble fountains, bronze statues depicting children playing, flowers imported from 5 different continents, stone paths leading to secret places, hidden gazebos, wrought iron benches, bridges over artificial streams, and above all, the floral clock. A giant clock made entirely of living flowers that changes color with the seasons. A clock that doesn't just tell the time but the passage of time in a place where, theoretically, time shouldn't exist. The cost, conservative estimates suggest an initial investment of $50 million, but that's just for construction. Because keeping Neverland running, that's a completely different story. 300 employees work on the property. Security guards, gardeners, animal handlers, maintenance technicians, cooks, cleaners, electricians, each receiving a monthly salary, each depending on that place to survive. The animals consume tons of food per month. Veterinarians need to be on call 24 hours a day. The amusement park rides require constant inspections, imported parts and safety certifications renewed every year. The electricity bill alone exceeds tens of thousands of dollars per month. And Michael pays for everything, without hesitation. Because for him, Neverland isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. It's the only place in the world where he can breathe, where he can be himself, where he can forget, even if just for a few moments, that there's a public Michael Jackson, the icon, the product, the legend, and simply exist. The earliest festivals are legendary. Michael invites children from hospitals, children with terminal illnesses, children from orphanages, children who have never had a decent toy, let alone a whole day at a private amusement park. They arrive by bus. They get off with wide eyes. Some cry. Others remain silent, as if they were before something sacred. And then Michael appears, not like a celebrity, but like a host, a friend. He plays video games with them, goes on the Ferris wheel, gives them popcorn, takes photos, laughs, plays hide and seek in the gardens. For these children, Neverland is pure magic. For Michael, it's redemption, because every laugh he hears, every hug he receives, every moment of genuine joy he provides is a way of healing the child he never got to be. But even at this moment, at the height of the dream, when everything seems perfect, when Neverland shines like a fallen star on earth, there are already signs, tiny, almost imperceptible. The employees are working double shifts. Some are sleeping in trailers on the property because there's no time to go home. Bills are starting to pile up. The banks are sending letters. Michael's lawyers are requesting urgent meetings. And Michael doesn't listen because he can't hear. Because admitting that Neverland is unsustainable would be admitting that the dream has a price, and he's not ready to pay yet. So he continues building. Keep inviting children. He continues to believe that if he only creates enough beauty, enough joy, enough magic, the rest will work itself out. But the rest never resolves itself. And behind the scenes at Neverland, far from the lights, far from the laughter, far from the carefully constructed fantasy, an invisible machine is at work. A machine that demands sacrifice. A machine that devours time, money, and human energy. A machine that will eventually devour the dreamer himself. 6 in the morning. The sun hasn't fully risen over the hills of Santa Ynez yet, but Neverland is already awake. The first to arrive are the gardeners, 15 men and women who begin their day before any visitor, or Michael himself, realizes that work is happening. They arrive in old pickup trucks, with worn tools, their clothes stained with dirt. There's no glamour here, just function. They have 6 hours to make sure everything looks perfect. Every fallen leaf needs to be removed. Every wilted flower needs to be replaced. The stone paths need to be swept. The fountains need to be cleaned and replenished. The floral clock, that iconic symbol of Neverland, needs to be adjusted, replanted, kept alive, as if it were a breathing organism, because Neverland can't seem real. It needs to look magical, and magic requires invisible maintenance. At 7 in the morning, the animal handlers arrive. Michael's private zoo houses over 50 exotic animals, each with specific needs, each representing an astronomical cost just to keep alive. Elephants consume 150 kilograms of hay per day. Giraffes eat fresh acacia leaves imported from specialized suppliers. Bubbles, the chimpanzee, has an elaborate diet. Organic fruits, fresh vegetables, vitamin supplements administered as if he were a human child. Veterinarians are on permanent call. Any sign of illness, any strange behavior requires immediate intervention, because losing an animal in Neverland is not just a tragedy, it's a failure. It's the shattering of the illusion, and the illusion cannot be broken. 8 in the morning. The amusement park maintenance team begins daily testing. Every attraction needs to be inspected. The roller coaster tracks are examined inch by inch. The Ferris wheel is lubricated and manually tested before any child rides it. The carousel is adjusted to ensure the wooden horses rotate smoothly, without jolts or noises that break the sonic fantasy. These machines weren't built for heavy commercial use. They were installed as part of a dream. But now, they're being used, constantly, and every use takes its toll. Parts need to be replaced. Engines need to be overhauled. Electrical systems need to be monitored 24 hours a day. And every part, every screw, every electrical cable costs money, a lot of money. 9 in the morning. The staff at the main mansion are fully operational. 12,000 square meters don't clean themselves. Every room needs to be spotless. Every surface, dust-free. Every mirror, spotless, every work of art, and there are hundreds of them scattered throughout hallways, rooms, and staircases, needs to be carefully preserved. Michael has specific requirements. The temperature in each room must be kept exactly at 21 degrees Celsius. The curtains must be opened at certain times and closed at others, creating a play of natural light that he considers aesthetically perfect. The fresh flowers on the coffee tables must be changed daily, not weekly, daily. And all of this happens while he sleeps because he can't see the work. He can only see the result. Midday, the security guards make their rounds. Neverland is a fortress, not just against outside invaders, but against reality, against photographers trying to scale the walls, against tabloids that would pay fortunes for a single image of the property's interior, against lawyers, creditors, anyone representing the outside world. There are hidden cameras, motion sensors, electronically controlled gates, a security team that works 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. They are not just security guards. They are guardians of an invisible border between two worlds, and that border is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Because here's the truth that nobody talks about when they look at Neverland. Keeping a dream alive costs $3 million a year. $3 million just to keep the lights on, to feed the animals, to pay the salaries, to ensure that when Michael wakes up, everything looks exactly as he imagined. And that doesn't include the events, the children's parties, the constant renovations, the new attractions he keeps adding, because the dream is never complete, because there's always something more he can build, something more he can offer, something more he can use to fill the void inside him. And who pays for this? Michael Jackson, of course. But Michael Jackson in 1993 is no longer as rich as he seemed. He earns millions from tours, millions from royalties, millions from image licensing. But he also spends compulsively. He buys $100,000 statues, paintings by Renaissance masters, clothes he wears only once, extravagant gifts for people he barely knows. And Neverland. Neverland devours everything. Financial managers send reports, lawyers schedule urgent meetings, banks start calling. But Michael doesn't answer. He doesn't want to hear about numbers, about debt, about the possibility that the dream is financially unsustainable. Because admitting that would be admitting that he failed, and he cannot fail, not after having survived the childhood he had. Because here's what few people understand about Michael Jackson: Neverland is not a whim. It's not arrogance. It's not celebrity eccentricity. It's about survival. Michael was a child prodigy, performing since the age of 5, rehearsing until he bled, being beaten by his father when he missed a step, being forced to smile, to sing, to dance, even when he was exhausted, sick, broken inside. He never had a childhood. He never played in the street. He never went to a public amusement park. He never sat on a Ferris wheel just for fun, without cameras, without expectations, without the pressure of being Michael Jackson. And then, as an adult, when he finally had money and power, he decided to recreate the childhood that had been stolen from him. But how do you create something that never existed? How do you build memories you never had? You build a place. You fill this place with everything you imagine it should have been, and you invite children, real children, with real laughter, with genuine joy, to experience the childhood you never got to have, and you watch, and you smile, and for a few moments you feel that maybe it was worth it, that maybe all the suffering had a purpose. But what about the 300 employees? And what about the gardeners who wake up at 6 in the morning? And what about the handlers who feed the elephants under the scorching sun? And what about the technicians who repair machines on night shifts? They are not living a dream. They are working hard, working constantly, working to sustain the fantasy of a man who, despite all his money, is profoundly, hopelessly lonely. And here's the cruel irony. Michael builds Neverland to feel free. But each employee hired, each machine installed, each animal added to the zoo binds him even more, because now he can't simply abandon the place. Now 300 families depend on him. Now 50 animals depend on him. Now every child who visits Neverland hopes he will be there, smiling, playing, being the Peter Pan they believe him to be. And Michael doesn't know how to stop acting anymore. Then he continues. He keeps smiling, he keeps throwing parties, he keeps writing checks that he's not sure he can cash. But at night, when Neverland finally sleeps, When the staff leave, when the park lights go out and silence returns, Michael walks alone through the gardens. It passes by the fountains, by the statues of children playing, by the floral clock that marks the time in a place that should be outside of time. And he wonders, I created a paradise or a prison? The answer, of course, lies in the mind of the man who built all of this. And to understand this mind, we need to go deeper. We need to understand not only what Michael Jackson created, but why couldn't he stop creating? There is a photograph of Michael Jackson taken in 1985. He's sitting on a park bench somewhere in Neverland, though at that time the ranch was still under construction. He's wearing a black fedora, sunglasses. His hands are clasped in his lap, and he's looking down, not for the camera, not for the person who photographed it, but downwards, as if he were observing something invisible, something that only he can see. Some people look at this photo and see an icon resting, a star in a moment of pause, but if you look closely, you see something else. You see loneliness. Michael Jackson spent his entire life under observation. From the age of 5, he was in the spotlight, literally. Bright lights that burned his retina, audiences that screamed his name, eyes that studied him, analyzed him, judged his every movement, every note, every facial expression. He never had any privacy. He was never allowed to make mistakes without consequences. He was never allowed to simply be a child. And when you grow up like that, when your childhood is turned into a performance, when every moment of joy needs to be monetized, when your family, your father, your own identity depend on you being perfect, you develop a very strange relationship with reality. You learn that the real world is hostile. You learn that people will take advantage of you. You learn that trusting is dangerous. And then you build an alternate world, a world where you have complete control. Neverland is not just a ranch. It's not just a mansion. It's not just an amusement park. Neverland is the physical embodiment of Michael Jackson's psychology. Each element of the place reflects a deep emotional need. The zoo, animals don't judge. Animals don't betray. Animals offer unconditional love. Michael felt safer with animals than with adults. The park attractions. He never got to go to real parks as a child, so he brought the park indoors. He recreated the experience that was denied to him. Were the children invited? Michael identified with them. He saw in them the innocence he had lost, and by bringing them joy, he was trying in some way to heal his own inner wound. The gigantic mansion, empty rooms, echoing corridors, spaces he never filled on his own. Because Michael never learned to be comfortable with himself, he needed space. He needed distance. He needed an architecture that reflected the emptiness he felt inside. And here is the darkest truth. Neverland was built as a refuge, but refugees eventually become prisons, because when you build an alternate world to escape reality, you eventually lose the ability to function in reality. Michael began to avoid Los Angeles. He avoided meetings with record label executives. He avoided interactions with adults who required him to deal with contracts, finances, and practical decisions. He preferred to stay in Neverland. I preferred playing with children, watching cartoons, walking in the gardens, feeding the animals, living in a perpetual state of fantasy, and the longer he stayed there, the harder it became to leave. There are psychologists who have studied Michael Jackson's case. They use terms like regression and dissociation. They talk about unprocessed childhood trauma, about pathological defense mechanisms, about the inability to integrate the wounded child with the functional adult. But behind all this clinical jargon, there is a simple truth. Michael Jackson didn't want to grow up, because growing up for him meant going back to being that abused child. That child who was beaten, that child who was forced to perform until they passed out, that child who was never allowed to say no. So he decided simply not to grow up, and Neverland was the place where that became possible. But that decision had consequences, financial, as we've already seen. $3 million a year just to keep the place running. but also emotional, because by creating a world where he could be a child, Michael completely isolated himself from any healthy adult relationships. He had no real friends, only employees, only people who depended on him financially, only people who couldn't say no to him. He didn't have stable romantic relationships. His attempts at marriage failed, because how do you build real intimacy when you're constantly playing a role? And he didn't trust anyone, because everyone who approached him wanted something: money, fame, access, connection to the public eye of Michael Jackson. Nobody wanted Michael Jackson to be kept private, the one who was afraid, the one who couldn't sleep properly, the one who took medication for anxiety, the one who looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the face he saw. And here's the crucial point. Neverland was Michael's attempt to create a place where he could be loved without having to be Michael Jackson. But that's impossible, because Michael Jackson, the name, the brand, the icon, was etched into every penny that sustained that place. It was etched into every employment contract that kept the employees employed. It was etched into every imported animal, every machine installed, every flower planted. There was no way to separate the man from the myth, and the more he tried, the more deeply lost he became. The decisions he made in Neverland reflect this. He spent fortunes on things that made no rational sense. Statues of himself dressed as Peter Pan, Renaissance paintings of angelic children, an entire room dedicated to trophies and awards that he never looked at. He threw extravagant parties for children he barely knew. He paid for surgeries for strangers. He donated money to causes his lawyers could never fully trace. Why? Because he was trying to buy something that cannot be bought. Innocence, redemption, the feeling that, despite everything, he was a good person. But the more he tried to prove it, the more suspicions he aroused. Because the outside world didn't understand Neverland. The outside world saw a grown man who invited children to sleep over at his mansion, who played with them, who spent more time with them than with adults. And the world out there started asking questions that Michael was never able to answer satisfactorily. Because how do you explain that your relationship with children is pure when you yourself are incapable of having healthy adult relationships? How do you explain that Neverland is a refuge when to the rest of the world it looks like a facade for something sinister? And that's when everything started to fall apart, because it didn't matter how many millions Michael spent. It didn't matter how many children he helped. It didn't matter how many animals he saved or how many flowers he planted. The narrative was changing, and once the narrative changes, there isn't enough money in the world to bring it back. The first accusation. It doesn't matter what you believe about Michael Jackson. It doesn't matter if you think he was innocent or guilty. What matters for the story of Neverland is this. From that moment on, the place ceased to be a dream, and it became evidence. The news explodes in the media like a nuclear bomb. A 13-year-old boy accuses Michael Jackson of sexual abuse. The family hires lawyers. The police raid Neverland. TV cameras surround the gates. Helicopters fly over the property, trying to capture images of the interior. And Michael disappears. He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't make immediate public statements. He simply hides. Inside Neverland, the investigation is invasive, brutal, humiliating. Police search every room in the mansion, every bedroom, every bathroom, every closet. They look for evidence, photographs, clothes, anything that could be used against him. They confiscate documents, security footage, lists of children who visited the ranch, names, addresses, everything. And while this is happening, Neverland remains open. The attractions remain open. The animals continue to be fed. The gardeners continue to work. But something changed, because now every visitor, every employee, every person who enters or leaves Neverland is viewed with suspicion. Michael resolves the case out of court. He pays the boy's family an estimated sum between $15 and $25 million. An out-of-court settlement, no admission of guilt, just bought silence. For Michael, this is a victory. He avoided a public trial. He avoided months of humiliating testimony. He avoided seeing his image further destroyed. But to the outside world, it's a confession, because innocent people don't pay $25 million to avoid a trial, and that feeling never goes away. From 1993 onwards, Neverland ceased to be a refuge, and it becomes a literal prison. Michael is afraid to invite children, afraid that any interaction will be misinterpreted, afraid that any gesture of affection will be turned into a headline. The parties stop. The amusement park is still open, but it's empty. The animals continue to be fed, but Michael rarely visits them. And the mansion, that cathedral of dreams, that sanctuary of childhood rebuilt, becomes a silent mausoleum. But the costs don't stop. 300 employees still need to be paid, even if there are no visitors, even if Michael isn't there most of the time. $3 million a year. More property taxes, which are constantly increasing. More insurance, more maintenance, more. And Michael is financially exhausted. He continues to make money from royalties, from the Beatles' music catalogue, which he bought years before, from image licensing, but he also continues spending. Compulsively, as if spending money could fill the void that is growing inside him. The second accusation, another child, another family, another investigation. But this time, Michael, no charge to fix it. This time, he's going to trial. And Neverland becomes the center of the case. Prosecutors describe the ranch as a trap, a place designed to lure children, to entice them with fun, with gifts, with the promise of a magical world. They show photographs of the interior of the mansion, of Michael's room, of the bed where supposedly children slept. They are calling former employees to testify. Some defend Michael, others do not. And for months, the whole world watches. Neverland is not just another private place. It's a stage, a potential crime scene, a symbol of everything that can go wrong when wealth, fame, and unresolved trauma collide. In 2005, Michael was acquitted of all charges. Legally, he is declared innocent. But for him, victory is empty. Because Neverland is destroyed. Not physically. The structures are still standing, the machines are still working, the animals are still breathing, but emotionally, the place is dead. Michael Jackson will never live in Neverland again. After the trial, he leaves the country. He goes to Bahrain, to Ireland, anywhere but that ranch in the California hills, because Neverland now represents everything he tried to escape. Trial, accusations, pain, public humiliation. The dream turned into a nightmare, and he can no longer look at that place without feeling nothing but emptiness. But the property remains. The employees continue working, even though many are being laid off, even though salaries are delayed, even though bills are piling up. The animals are removed, donated to zoos, relocated. Bubbles, the chimpanzee who was once almost as famous as Michael, is sent to a primate sanctuary in Florida. The attractions are switched off. The Ferris wheel stops turning. The carousel falls silent. The train remains stationary on the tracks, becoming covered in rust. And the mansion becomes a ghost town. In 2008, Bank of America threatened to foreclose on the mortgage. Michael owed more than $24 million in secured loans against Neverland. He has no way to pay. Then an investment firm assumes part of the debt. It becomes a co-owner, and Michael loses total control of the place he built. Neverland is no longer his. It's a financial asset, an accounting problem, a property that's worth less than it should be. And here's the brutal irony. Michael built Neverland so that it would never grow up. But Neverland forced him to confront reality in the cruelest way possible. Debts, lawsuits, loss, humiliation, everything he tried to avoid caught up with him anyway. And in the end, he had no choice but to leave everything behind. But the story doesn't end here. Because places like Neverland never truly die. They transform. And the transformation of Neverland says a lot about what we do with the dreams of people who are gone. June 25th, 2009. Michael Jackson dies in Los Angeles. Accidental overdose of propofol, a powerful anesthetic he used to sleep. He was 50 years old. The news travels the world in seconds. Millions of people cry. Vigils are organized. Tributes are paid. The man who spent his entire life being judged, criticized, ridiculed, suddenly becomes a legend again. And Neverland remains empty, silent, waiting. In the following years, the property remains in a strange limbo. Michael's estate still owes millions. The creditors want their money back, but nobody wants to buy Neverland. Because how can you sell a place like that? How do you convince someone to pay $100 million for a property that carries such historical weight? That is associated with accusations, trials, and the death of one of the most famous men in the world. You don't sell, you wait. In 2014, Neverland was officially renamed. It can no longer be called Neverland. The name carries too much baggage, too much history, too much trauma. Then it becomes Sycamore Valley Ranch, a generic name. Corporate, harmless, as if changing one's name could erase the past. The property was put up for sale in 2015. Starting price, $100 million. Nobody buys it. 2016, $75 million. Nobody buys it. 2017, $67 million. Nobody buys it, because here is the truth. Neverland is worth far more as a symbol than as a property. As a symbol, it represents dreams, tragedy, excess, lost innocence, and destructive fame. As a property, it's just an old mansion with broken machinery in a remote location, requiring millions in renovations. Who would buy this? Finally, someone buys it. A billionaire named Ron Burkle. Businessman, investor, personal friend of Michael Jackson during the last years of his life. Selling price, $22 million, a fraction of the original cost, a fraction of what Michael spent to build and maintain the place. But Burkle doesn't buy Neverland to transform it into something new. He buys it to preserve it, not as a museum, not as a tourist attraction, but as private property, a place where Michael's memory can rest without being exploited. And then nothing happens. Neverland remains closed. The gates are locked. The private road is empty. There are no visitors. There are no parties. There are no children laughing. Just silence. But the silence in Neverland is never complete. Because even now, more than a decade after Michael's death, the place is still the object of obsessive curiosity. Drones fly over the property, capturing aerial images that are posted on YouTube. Fans drive up to the gates, take photos, leave flowers, letters and drawings. And documentaries, dozens of them, explore every inch of the Neverland story. Some defend Michael, others condemn him. But they all agree on one thing. Neverland is important, not just as property, but as a symbol of something greater. So, what does Neverland really represent? For some, it's proof that fame and money don't guarantee happiness, that you can have everything and still feel empty. For others, it's a warning about the danger of never processing trauma, about the cost of trying to rebuild the past instead of moving on. For others, it's still a tragedy, the story of a man who was broken as a child and spent his entire life trying to fix himself in the only way he knew how. But there is another way to look at Neverland, like the place where a dream died, but also like the place where a dream was attempted. Michael Jackson had problems, many problems, psychological, financial, and legal problems, but he also had a vision. He truly believed he could create a place where children, especially sick children, poor children, children forgotten by the world, could experience pure joy. And for a few years, he did that. Thousands of children visited Neverland. Thousands of children rode that Ferris wheel, rode that train, hugged those animals, and for them, that place was magical. It doesn't matter what happened next. It doesn't matter the accusations, the trials, the headlines. For those children, at that moment, Neverland was real, and perhaps that's what we should remember. Dreams always come at a cost. Creating something beautiful requires sacrifice. Trying to be perfect, trying to build a paradise, inevitably reveals our imperfections. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Today, Neverland is empty. The machines are idle. The gardens are less tended to. The mansion is silent. But the place still breathes. He still carries the memories of everything that happened there. The laughter, the tears, the dreams, the nightmares. And perhaps in the end, that's what all great places are. Not just physical structures, but memory containers. Places where human history, with all its beauty and all its darkness, is preserved. So here is my final question for you. If you could create your own Neverland, would you, knowing it would be expensive, knowing it could fail, knowing the world could judge you for it, would you still try to build your dream home? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to know. And if you want me to investigate another historic mansion, another palace, another ranch, another place where dreams and reality collided, tell me which one. Because this is only the first story, and there are so many more waiting to be told. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and let's explore together the darkest and most fascinating places that history has ever created, because all great beauty requires sacrifice, not always from those who admire her,